DHEA is an excellent hormone that I often refer to as the youth hormone. So a lot of hormones go downhill as you get older, but DHEA is one of the most drastic. And it's one of the first things that the kind of scientific researchers found out about it when they first discovered it, is just what a big difference there is between younger people and older people. And so because of that, they assumed that, if you could increase your DHEA again, that you could go back to being youthful. I mean, maybe hopeful thinking, right? But that was the idea. So if a 20-year-old... if a 60-year-old has 80% less than 20-year-old, so let's say, a 20-year-old has 100 units, 60-year-old only has 20 units, that's a massive drop-off. So the theory was if we could boost that right back up again with supplementation, so it's the same as a 20-year-old, then they'll feel like a 20-year-old. Unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as that. DHEA has a lot of very varied effects. Now, DHEA is often just thought of as a precursor to testosterone and estrogen. And that's because it is. So your body makes testosterone out of DHEA primarily, and then it makes estrogen out of DHEA as well, or it can make estrogen out of testosterone. So it's often thought of in that light, but in fact, it has a lot of its own interesting benefits as well. I think one of the reasons that it hasn't really caught on is because its effects can be a little bit unpredictable. I personally find it to be very stimulating, and I find it to be brain stimulating, but in a good way. Like, to me, it sharpens up cognition, improves memory, improves recall, and that's documented. That's not just my opinion. There's a lot of work, research and evidence about how it has that effect. But there's also evidence that it helps people sleep better at night, completely conversely. So I've seen some bioidentical hormone doctors recommend to have it in the morning to give you energy, but I've seen some recommend to have it at night to help you sleep better. It really seems to depend. So let's look at what it actually is. So DHEA is made by the adrenal glands. So it is actually an adrenal hormone. The ones that we tend to think of as adrenal hormones are like cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, maybe also aldosterone. But we don't tend to think of DHEA as an adrenal hormone, but it technically is, even though usually it's thought of as more a sex hormone because it's turned into the major sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen. So I personally love it because of the energizing effect of it. Now, the way I look at it, as I said, it's an adrenal hormone. So DHEA often it's the balance of it to cortisol, which is really important. So cortisol is also a stimulating hormone, but cortisol is catabolic and DHEA is anabolic. So cortisol tends to, although it can lead to fat gain kind of indirectly, and certainly potentially does, because cortisol can, lower thyroid hormone, which can lead to fat gain, or cortisol can lead to excess estrogen, which can lead to fat gain. So indirectly, cortisol can lead to fat gain, but technically on its own, cortisol is actually a catabolic hormone. It relates to tearing down of body tissues rather than building up. And unfortunately, what it tends to be specifically tearing down is muscle tissue rather than fat, which is why cortisol is not used as a way of, losing weight. But it is a catabolic hormone. DHEA is the opposite. It's an anabolic hormone. So it's something that builds up, especially, again, muscle. Now, if someone is young and in their prime and takes DHEA, will it help them gain muscle? The research says no. But if someone is 60 and their DHEA is really low, does increasing their DHEA help them to gain muscle mass? The science says yes. So it's not that it's necessarily like a steroid, testosterone thing that will make you put on more and more muscle no matter what, but it is something that a lack of it will lead to that process. So the way I look at it, what I like about it is, first of all, it balances my tendency to have high cortisol, because you want to have a good balance between those two. And I find it has a lot of the energizing and also anti-inflammatory benefits that cortisol does, but without that kind of more stress, anxiety feel to it. However, that's at a certain level. I find that too much DHEA is actually overstimulating for me. So I still have to find the right balance and the right level of it. But it makes me feel youthful. Just to go back to the youth hormone, like it gives me more like energy and enthusiasm and stuff like that.
How does that differentiate then from thyroid in this way? Because you're saying the DHEA is energizing. It's got this youthfulness. It's working on energy. It has a balance with cortisol as well. So how does that differentiate here?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe in terms of subjectively, not much, but in terms of the mechanism, so thyroid is energizing by ATP production. My understanding of DHEA is it's more energizing in the way that dopamine is energizing. It does have some effect of modulating and increasing dopamine, rather than, and in fact, I think, we understand that dopamine makes us feel certain things. I think there's not enough understanding that DHEA also makes us feel something. This is what I was saying. So cortisol makes us feel that kind of stressed kind of energy. Dopamine makes us feel that more motivated, enthusiastic, passionate energy. I think DHEA has its own quality of, I'd call it mental energy behind it, as opposed to either of those two types of energy. But it's more like an experience of energy as opposed to the building block of energy itself, ATP, which is what thyroid is specifically helping with. Now, it has a lot of knock-on benefits on all of it. So DHEA is in the kind of good guy category of hormones. So it supports thyroid, it supports progesterone, it supports testosterone, it supports, pregnenolone, which we've talked about. So it's kind of on the good guy side, and then it's, helping to reduce cortisol. It's helping to, in certain circumstances, it can help to, reduce serotonin, reduce noradrenaline, stuff like that. Now, there is a potential downside to DHEA if you overdo it. Too much DHEA can turn into, in general, DHEA, once you've got enough. So one of the reasons I feel confident to take DHEA is because my blood tests say I'm low in the reference range. So for me, it's safe because even if I take, 25, 50 milligrams a day, I'm still going to be medium in the reference range. So I'm not excessive. Does that make sense? If you're already high in the reference range for DHEA, I would not supplement DHEA. Definitely. I would not supplement it without testing, first of all, blood levels of DHEA. I also would not test it without without testing blood levels of estrogen. And if you're a woman, without testing blood levels of testosterone. I think women having excess estrogen is actually pretty rare, especially when they get older. We'll talk about that in a different segment. But certainly both sexes have a tendency to excess estrogen, especially men by the time they hit their 40s. And so DHEA can be turned into testosterone or estrogen. The more that you're in a stressed, inflamed, unhealthy, low energy producing state, the more it will be turned into estrogen. So unfortunately, it's not this panacea of youthfulness that they originally envisaged, because people are already kind of in a mess hormonally and, health-wise. Often they'll convert too much of the DHEA into estrogen, which will actually make the situation worse.
So if I'm a highly stressed individual and I think, taking DHEA could be a really great idea, and not saying it isn't, but there's a risk there potentially that by me taking that DHEA, it could just be turned into estrogen and increasing more stress and increasing more of what I don't want. Exactly.
And so medical doctors I've seen, like Dr. Platt, for instance, he talks about how he doesn't recommend, he loves to give DHEA to people who need it because it's very beneficial, but he doesn't love to give it to people who already have excess estrogen. If they have low estrogen, he'll give them a lot of DHEA if they need it. If they have, medium estrogen, he'll give them a little bit of DHEA, but he's very aware of that possibility. And so I think that's wise. I would take the same approach myself as well. And so, as I say, the only reason I use it is because I have like medium estrogen and I have low DHEA and I have high cortisol. So all of that together means some more DHEA to, give my brain a boost to balance out the cortisol, and I can do it without worrying about excess estrogen, especially excess estrogen in relation to testosterone, because I've got high testosterone. So it works for me, but it doesn't work for everyone. So yeah, you want to take it only if it's appropriate for you.
So what would be the best form?
It is sold in a different form called 7-keto DHEA. That type has none of the downside that I just talked about with estrogen. That type is generally recommended actually to boost metabolism. So that gets even more complicated with your earlier question about how is it different from thyroid.
So maybe I should. I don't know, or that person should.
So that 7-keto form is basically sold as like a weight loss thing. I don't know. Most weight loss things often don't work because the factors leading to like weight gain and not being able to lose weight are often significant enough that it's very difficult to counteract them. But it's potentially worth a try. It's cheap. It's side effect free, relatively. So why not in many cases? It's thermogenic, so it can, increase your body heat. So yeah, the more I'm thinking about it, Chris, you're actually right. It does share a lot of properties with thyroid, and it is, something. But again, like it's youthfulness, right? As we've talked about in detail with the metabolism episode, high metabolism is, one of the main markers of youthfulness, and so. Yeah, I guess the more I think about it, I think you're right. We could put DHEA in a very similar category from thyroid to also support the metabolism. But as I said, for me, I wouldn't use it for that purpose because thyroid is much more relevant for that. I would use it more for the purpose of boosting energy, especially mental energy.
Yeah, I mean, and depending if you don't have the right form, there is a risk over here of that DHEA turning into estrogen, which we don't want. So, yeah. Okay.
Yes. And so other than the 7-keto DHEA, which is sold as capsules, there is just DHEA sold as a capsule. And so that's basically how you would take it. I see some people also selling it transdermally. If you use it transdermally, it's especially if you apply it to an area of hair, it's going to have like a different effect again. It's actually more likely to be turned into testosterone in the body because you have something called 5-alpha reductase on your hair follicles, which will then potentially, not necessarily, depending on everything else, like convert it more into testosterone. So some guys use it that way because they want to boost their testosterone without actually buying testosterone. But if you want it just as DHEA, I think, taking capsule is by far the simplest thing to do.
And we mentioned some of the safety concerns with it potentially being turned into something that we don't want, but are there any other safety concerns that you want to mention?
Again, if we use it, is it safe? And if you accidentally took way too much and you called 911, would they send an ambulance? Probably not. And that's why it's allowed to be sold as a dietary supplement. I put it, again, at least as safe as salt or potassium or iron or zinc. It's relatively safe.
Yeah, so there's a few things to unpack there. So what I'm hearing is DHEA is really helpful for the brain, youthfulness, things like that. Again, and we talked about it being similar to the thyroid, but of course there are differences as well.
Those are just my favorites, by the way, but it's been shown to be helpful for cardiovascular health. It's been shown to be helpful for immune health. It's been shown to be helpful for digestive health. Like it's got a full spectrum of potential benefits. It's actually really wide reaching. As I said, it's one of those things like thyroid. It feels like most people would benefit from some. It just depends on how much. Maybe for some people, it's just a very little bit. For DHEA, if you already have a lot of DHEA, it's not going to help you to have more.
Right. And let me ask you this, because there is that concern with downregulating. If somebody is taking DHEA, will it downregulate in their body?
My understanding of that is no. Again, things sold as dietary supplement, the amount it downregulates is minimal, if at all. So with progesterone, with DHEA, it's fairly minimal, which is why it's allowed to be sold as a dietary supplement. And in fact, it may even have the opposite effect. This DHEA, along with pregnenolone and progesterone and thyroid, was one of the favorites of both of the doctors we've referred to a lot, Dr. P and Dr. Platt. And I know at least Dr. P has said, if you use it, it can kickstart your body's own production. So it can actually be the opposite. Rather than downregulating, it can start a kind of virtuous cycle where your body then is keeping the level high on its own. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Rejuvenate podcast. If you want to watch the full episode that came from, just click on the link above. Or if you just want to watch our latest video, then click the link below. And make sure that you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you.